Hello and welcome to the show KHULLA SIMANA. My name is Radheshyam Malla. Actually, we are talking about open border between Nepal and India and the challenges that have been created because of the misuse of open border, and how has it in a way affected the economy of both the countries. That is what we always think about. So here today we have invited one of the distinguished guests to our show, Professor Christopher Lingle, one of the political economists. Let us welcome Professor Lingle. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
Professor Lingle, how does this, in sense of insecurity, directly or indirectly impact the economic development of the country?
Well, it's interesting. The idea of open borders, the risks and the costs of the concept of open borders is almost always exaggerated. We tend to overlook that the benefits exceed most of the costs. What we have to do, of course, one would try to minimize the cost, but most of them are exaggerated. And by the way, to be provocative, I think you should deeply consider an open border with China.
So you said that it's more like exaggerated version. How do you say that this talking about open border can be a kind of matter of exaggeration?
Well, the costs of the open borders are exaggerated. Many people worry about the loss of jobs to migrants. Normally, cross-border migration is relatively unskilled labor looking for work that locals will not participate in. I've seen this in Bhutan, for example, where many Indians came across the border to do work that the Bhutanese wouldn't do, and I suppose it may be somewhat similar here in Nepal. So as it turns out, there are many fewer risks in having open borders. And as we see, the reality is, even though governments promise to protect the borders and provide restrictions of flows, whether or not it be human trafficking or weapons, they still get through. Because if you have public officials, you have opportunities for corruption, and you have the opportunity for people to take advantage of that.
Okay, my question was to Professor Lingle, that how does this, sense of insecurity, because it has been said that, a misuse of open border has created a sense of threat.
A sense of?
Sense of threat. Sense of threat, security threat actually.
Yeah, a threat.
Since it has been a kind of sense of security threat because of misuse of it, how does it impact, or let us say, how does it affect the economic development of the country?
Again, I mean, the idea, the problem of security threats is not an issue of open borders. There's not an open border between Kashmir and Pakistan, but there's a security threat. So the presence of government officials who are presumably briefed with the task of keeping borders secure, they do it very poorly in any case. So we see very clearly the same is true in the United States. Cross-border traffic still occurs. The threats are probably exaggerated in the sense that if you open the borders, my primary concern, of course, is opening the borders to economic goods. That is the least threatening activity. The problem with cross-border trafficking of human beings for illicit activities like prostitution is another question, or weapons. But for the rest, I think borders should be fundamentally open. Open borders for goods and services should be done without hesitation, and then you look at the other issues.
Since you are saying that open border has to be introduced, and if it is there, it is not bad, it is good.
I think that on balance there are net benefits. There will be risk, there will be costs, there will be threats, but on balance the benefits will be there. And primarily the benefits will come from cross-border transfer of goods and services. And as I say, not only with India, but you should also have the same relations with China with respect to goods and services.
Okay, so do you have some international evidences where there has been open border, hence their economic development is getting up and up?
Well,
things.
In the United States, the interesting thing is, even with closed borders in the United States, we have benefited enormously from the cross-border movement of people from Latin America. America has cheaper food, better housing, cheaper housing, a more vibrant economy because of the inflow of these people. Now, unfortunately, because of stupid migration laws, these people are there illegally, and there's some tension about their legal status and being able to remain there. But the fact is, these people come, they take jobs that Americans don't want, and as a consequence, Americans have, as I say, cheaper food, because now there are people that will do these jobs. They have better housing because they work in the construction industry, and that housing is cheaper. So America has been a net gainer, even though that hadn't been an open border. Imagine if there had been an open border with respect to allowing these migrant laborers to come in. America would be much better off.
Could be a lot of challenges as well at the meantime.
Well, again, but there are always challenges. I mean, one takes risk whenever one implements a policy of any sort. But then, as an economist, I always want to know, do the benefits exceed those costs? And many of these threats in the United States, the people that complain the most about the cross-border migration are the trade unions, which are simply trying to protect their own interests. They're not protecting the interests of the consumer. What consumer is harmed by the inflow of cheaper goods and services? No consumer. And all of us are consumers. If we increase the cross-border transfer of goods and services, all consumers, all households will be better off because they'll have access to more and cheaper products. And that's what people really want.
Okay, so Professor Lingle, actually, what do you think, like, you know, how can the politicians, because you are a political economist, how do you think political, like, you know, stakeholders need to be that much responsible in settling down the issues like this so that open border can be boon to the country like us?
Well, the tragedy, as I interpret it here in Nepal, is that the political class is so busy quarreling over power, quarreling over control of resources, that they're not paying attention to the well-being and welfare of the Nepalese citizens. The political class of Nepal is holding your economy hostage. They are not doing the things that they should be doing. As I say, they're quarreling over who has power. Power means the advantages to the political class, not advantages to the Nepali citizens. So I'm not very confident that they'll make the right decisions. First of all, the miserable economic results that they presided over in the, say, last decade don't indicate that they are willing to engage a debate even over what are the correct economic policies. I would start, of course, with open borders for goods and services. And again, I'm focusing on this. I think your interests and concerns are more about security issues. But there's no security threat of having open border for goods and services. The only result from that will be more higher quality goods and services at a cheaper price. Everyone in Nepal becomes richer as a consequence, both from China, both from India, and, by the way, opening the border with Pakistan and access to trade through Pakistan. I think the fact that you restrict your access to Pakistan reflects the interests of the Indian state, not the Nepali state. And I think Nepal would be well served to stop being effectively a vassal state to India and pursue its own international policies, following its own domestic interests. So recapture your sovereignty. You know, don't allow India to dominate and force you to do things that are not in your domestic interests, especially with respect to Pakistan and India.
No, actually, we're talking about this. What sort of responsibilities do the political leaders need to take so that the, like, you know, issues that have been raised because of this open border or whatever it is can be best settled? As
I say, I mean, in a way, I thought I had addressed that, because I don't see the political will for the political leadership to actually engage this discussion. I may be wrong in this regard. This isn't as far as I can see, on the agenda. It should be on the agenda. Now, how do you make them accountable and responsible for it? It's very problematic because they're, as I say, my interpretation is they're just squabbling over and quarreling over power for themselves. And so that's the struggle. It's the debate here doesn't seem to me to be about what are the best economic policies to bring, and open borders, in my view, is only one element of that in terms of allowing the economy to reach its full potential. So I don't know how you force the political class, the bureaucrats, the politicians, into discussing this issue as you and I are trying to do here.
Okay, so since you have been like a political economist, from that perspective, how do you evaluate the economic development of the country like ours, and what is the difference between the strategies that have been implemented so far? Hence, the developed countries are getting richer and richer in terms of like economic prosperity kind of things. So how should the developing countries need to follow those things that will eventually make them richer?
Well, again, first of all, there has to be a debate and an understanding of what the economic policy potential of this country is. Nepal is uniquely positioned and is amazingly privileged to be a potential corridor, trade corridor between China and India, and also other neighboring countries. But there's a lack of realization of this, that the political class is not really addressing what would be a very costless, a very low-cost change. And that would be, as we're discussing here, a completely open border for goods and services. That you would become like Singapore was 30 years ago, an open port, so to speak, where everyone could come and buy and sell what they wished without any kind of restrictions at the border for tariffs or excise duties. And as a consequence, the well-being of Nepal would improve overnight, literally overnight, because the decrease in the cost of goods and services would mean that everyone at the current income that they earn now could buy more. Okay. This could not be a bad thing. This can only be a good thing. They will buy more, not only of imports, but because they have more money left over from their income, they'll buy more domestic goods and services, whether it be to go into restaurants, to be able to afford a taxi, whatever it may be. So this will stimulate the economy very rapidly. And look what happened in Singapore. Becoming a free port, being open to foreign investment, but more importantly, being hospitable for domestic investment, Singapore was able to grow very rapidly. There's no reason for Nepal not to be the same. Okay. Especially in a world where there's such cheap international capital available for either borrowing and lending, and the transfer of technologies is much easier today than it was 20 years ago.
Okay, my last question to you is, what kind of relation do you see between economy, prosperous economy, and the political will, let's say willpower? What kind of balance must be there so that country will lead towards prosperity?
Poverty is not a natural state of man. If we find a country or an area where there's persistent poverty, we can only blame the political decision-making, the policy mix. This is true around the world. No one wants to wake up in the morning and remain poor and have their children remain poor. Everyone, if given an opportunity, will take the advantages that are available to them and improve their lives. If they are frustrated in doing that, there's some outside force that stops them. And that primary outside force, as we see in the modern world, are governments. So government policy is responsible for poverty, and government policy can be directed towards promoting prosperity. And promoting prosperity in this country would be open borders for goods and services, would be reducing labor market regulations, because that's labor friendly. The laborers are disadvantaged by the labor market regulations that restrict businesses from hiring and firing. What that means is that many businesses have closed shop here because they could not continue paying their total wage bill along with other costs that they have of operation. And so laborers are out of jobs. And the blame there are the labor market policies. It's not the capitalists, it's not the managers, it's primarily the consumer, because the consumer doesn't have enough to be able to pay the prices for those goods and services that keep those workers employed. So ultimately, the scope of prosperity is determined and limited by the quality of public policy with regard to the economy. And in Nepal, the two major areas that I would focus on are deregulating the labor market and becoming a much more vibrant trading partner with your neighbors.
Okay, that can best help, you think, promote the economic status of the country.
Absolutely. And of course, the other thing would be to make licensing of businesses much more, much simpler. Now, there's a, I think, a rather foolish discussion about trying to give privileges to foreign investors that you don't give to domestic investors. This, to me, is a rather surprising and shocking idea. Why would you not give advantages to Nepalese that you give to foreigners? They say, well, we would give foreigners special access to tax provisions, but not to Nepalese. We're going to keep them poor. We're going to give special advantages to foreigners where they can be exempt from certain labor market restrictions, but not to Nepalese. Why would you think this is a good idea? Why wouldn't you first give those advantages to the Nepalese investor? Because this will solve your problem much better than relying on rich foreigners. First of all, make the domestic economy hospitable to domestic investment. And then the foreigners will come. Because if the Nepalese investors have these relatively low taxes, relatively low regulation, then this will attract the foreigners. So I think they've got it backwards. If you want foreign investment, make Nepal friendly to domestic investment, and then the foreigners will come.
Professor Lingle, to make it a kind of conclusion, what do you say that what a developing country like ours need to work on to be very specific? What do you think, like, there are some things to be done on behalf of political leaders, bureaucrats, so that it will lead towards the economic prosperity in the days to come?
Well, I have to say I'm fairly pessimistic about that, because in the end, all of my prescriptions ultimately depend upon the capacity or the willingness of the political class to admit their mistakes and to understand how they are obstructing the potential of this wonderful country. The people here are competent. You have enormous resources at your disposal. There is absolutely no reason for this country to remain poor, except for the fact that the political class is obstructing you from achieving your birthright to be able to utilize these wonderful resources, the manpower, the intelligent people here, the energetic people here. These things don't explain poverty. The fact that you don't have good people. You do have good people here. You do have good resources. You have an ample supply of resources, and you have wonderful agricultural potential. But the political class has to come to terms with their own fault and holding you back. Now, how do we get them to do that? I'm not very optimistic, because they are too busy squabbling and quarreling over power, over petty issues. And meanwhile, people here, many people remain in misery. That's unconscionable. And I think the politicians here are particularly at fault in that regard.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lingle, for coming to our show.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
We had a talk about Nepal-India open border, and the misuse of it created kind of like, security threat to the country, both the countries. And how does that security threat impact the economic development of the country? So we had a talk with Professor Lingle. Thank you so much for watching us. Keep on watching Himalaya Television. Namaste.